Hello and welcome to this Game Pit Stop for founders of Gloomhaven, a game designed by Isaac Childres and published by Cephalofair Games. In Founders of Gloomhaven, each of the players are going to be both working together and competing in order to found the city of Gloomhaven itself, starting with basic resource buildings and building up to 2 levels, and they build till they're building prestige buildings to score lots of points over the course of a game. The actual mechanisms are that each player is going to have a hand of action cards. And from that hand of action cards, on their turn, they're going to choose one. Now, every card can be played face down for just a basic action. And that's going to allow you to gain 1 income, so you've got money for your actions. Gain 1 fleeting prestige, which will help you when it comes to votes. Be able to put a road down, which will help make connections in the city. Or to place one of your workers once they're available to you, but they're not available at the beginning of the game. Now, if you do that, the other players do nothing on their turn, and the start player marker is going to move on, and then that player will get to choose an action. More often, however, you'll be choosing to do some of the main actions on those cards, and we're going to go through those main actions and build up an idea of how the game plays. The first main action will be to trade. Now, when you're trading, you're going to be bringing basic resources into the city, or you're going to get access to basic resources. There are 9 races in the game, and 8 of them are linked to the 8 basic resources. So when you choose one, you definitely get access to one for it. So in this case, with the Valrath, you'll always get access to metal. Once everyone's chosen their races, then you're going to reverse draft and reverse player order to choose your second resource, which you have access to. And the first thing you can do when you're trading is to bring one of your 2 basic resources into play in the game. Now, this is the only time when you're building that you can choose to build anywhere on the board. At any other time, no matter what you're building, it must be connected to one of your buildings previously on the board, and we will start talking about connections and how that works. But in this case, when you're trading to bring in one of these 2 resources, you can place it almost anywhere. Now, there are a couple of rules. This is the map of Gloomhaven, and it's split into 3 sectors divided by walls and the river. And for lots of the different buildings in the game, there are 3 copies of each of them. And the reason is you can only have 1 of each building in each of the sectors of the city. You'll also note that there's different terrain types here on the city, from entrance to coastal to forest to central. And when you look here, there's a different cost for placing these into play. And we're talking about this left-hand column here when we place tiles. So if I wish to bring this wood resource into play, I could bring it into play anywhere I wanted in any of these 2 sectors. There's already one in play here. And let's say I place it up there. And that's going on forest, and we look here, that would then cost me 3 money into the bank. That then would form the start of a connection for me, and I can start building other buildings off there. Now, when you're building buildings, while they do have to be connected via roads, you can never build adjacent to yourself. And these discs denote that you own that building, whatever the building is. Now, other discs can appear underneath you so that other people have got access to those resources, but whichever disc is on top and builds it, that's the disc is always going to stay there. You note that you own the resource over here on this resource tracker board, and also if you get access to a new type of resource, you're going to push your income up, and we'll see how you're going to get that money. Now, I just mentioned that you can get access to other people's resources, and you're going to need to get access to other people's resources in order to build up through the different layers of building in the game. And to do that is also in the trade. And it's down here, and again, depends upon what type of terrain that the resource is on that you're trying to get. It'll cost you 2, 3 or 4 money, and you simply slip your marker underneath here. So for example, if I wish to get access to this knowledge, it's built on a central tile, so it's going to cost me 4 money, and I would slide under there. Now, when you choose to do any main action on your turn, and this right-hand column, by the way, is for when you've got fewer than 4 players. There are neutral resources in the game, so it changes the rules. But if you choose to do any main card like this, the other players then, in clockwise orders around the table, get to follow what you're doing. And in this case, they get to do exactly the same as you've done. However, they can't do it in these forest or central areas. So trade is how we're going to get basic resources onto the board. Well, why are we getting basic resources onto the board? Because we're then going to upgrade them by making them connect to these upgrade buildings of level 2 or level 3, and that's how we're going to start scoring points. So we might look at a couple of upgrade actions that we could possibly do. Now, let's say, for example, on that trade, instead of coming in here for knowledge, I'd slipped in and under the humans here, and I now have access to their gems. We'll then get an upgrade. Now, when you choose it yourself, you get to place a road, which will help with your connections, which we're going to talk about now when we talk about upgrading. And when you follow along, you just don't get to place a road. Now, I want to upgrade to this jewellery. Now, this jewellery tells me that the only thing that I need access to in order to do this is gems. So I have access to these gems here. So I can pay my 4 money, and that's what that symbol is. It's always money in the game, for my upgrade action, and I can put this, and it must be connected to that resource. So although this would be impossible in this setup, if we pretend that I own this gem, it must be connected via a road to here, but I can never build adjacent to another building that I own. That would not be allowed. But connection works all around 8 areas, including diagonal. So I could build this over here, and then I would own it. And again, we do the thing where if I own it and I haven't got any more ownership of it previously, I will push up my income and I will start making more money as the game goes on. In this case though, as the human actually owns those gems, I have got the ability just to push in here. And by that building being adjacent to the gem building, it automatically connects and I automatically get this. And whoever owns those gems is going to score 1 point. And in this case, it's going to be human. Now, why would I do that in order to score 1 point? Because hopefully that jewelry is going to be useful to me later on. And as we need the gems here to build this jewelry, we might need this jewelry in order to build more complicated buildings. So let's have maybe a little look at that. This fur has been built. When you look at this fur, it requires access to livestock and to wood. Here's wood and here's livestock. And if I'm placing this here as the yellow player, then here we go. There's access to wood and there's access to livestock. Therefore, I can build this. I now own furs. My income goes up. I've got control of furs. I can use the furs later on. Whoever owns the livestock scores a point. In this case, the blue player, the quattro, and whoever owns the wood, in this case, it does happen to be me, is going to score a point. And there we go. There are other ways that that could get built. If we look at this, for example, if we needed that wood and that livestock, and we wanted to build a fur here, it would need to connect it back up to this livestock, which is fine because blue player is going to build this, connected diagonally through this gate and connected up to the wood, and blue has bought access to there. So they can build this building here. It's not adjacent to any of their own buildings, but the point scoring will be slightly different. Why are they building these furs when we're just scoring equal points out of it? Because if we look at a further upgrade here in the weapons, this requires to have metal and furs. And the blue player has got the furs and got access to this metal here. Therefore, they could use it to pop this down here. And whoever provides the metal to this building is going to score 1 point. And whoever provides the furs, well, it's 4 points, but things get slightly more complicated than that. With the 4 points, you need to cascade down through the furs as to who built here. So, okay, that sounds complicated. Whoever owns the furs gets 4 points. They must pass on these 2 points back to the original owners. In this case, the livestock is to themselves. So 2 points for the furs, 1 for livestock, and 1 back to the wood, which was the original resource, and that will go over to the yellow player. And as you upgrade buildings too, you always have to cascade the points that way down, back down through, and the numbers in parenthesis will tell you how much you're going to get just for building it on top of what the other things are. And the rules change when you've got neutral resources in play. Now that's a lot of how you're going to score points. What I was showing you there is access through these funny buildings, through these walls. I told you there's different sectors here because you've got personal buildings you can build on your turn when there's a construct comes up. You have got gates, which will let you connect through walls, or on the other side of them, you'll find there's bridges, which will let you connect through a river. The only difference between these and all the other ones are that gates and bridges only connect personally for you. No one else can form a connection through one of your gates or one of your bridges. The other building you can build is a house. Now, a house must be connected to your own network. So for this house, for example, I could put it here connected by network, and it must always be built on a forest space and a green space. So I can pop that there. Now that gives me a couple of benefits. Firstly, it gives me access to my first worker. Now, my first worker, we said down here in the basic action, if I flip a card, or when you follow along with someone's action, if you don't want to do what's on the bottom of the card, you can always do a basic action of taking money, take a fleeting influence, build a road, or place a worker somewhere on the board. So also it improves my income, which again we're going to get to. With this worker, you've always got a racial power, and this one for the Valrath happens to be each other player pays you 1 money for each claim token they have on resource tiles that you own. So as we said, when you own a tile, you always disc on top, and that never changes. And in this case, the blue player, the quattro, 2 of the discs claiming resources I own, therefore they now have to pay me 2 money every time I activate this worker, whenever I'm following along or choose it as my base action. As prestige buildings come into play, as we'll see, they will give you other options for your worker placement during the game. The next action we're going to talk about is the 4th action, is recruit. Now when you recruit, you take from this advisor board down here, and all the advisors have got slightly modified versions of the basic actions that you already have. They require that you have access to a certain resource, and it will be the level 2 resource and level 3 resources as you go through a stacked deck of advisors. And they're going to give you points and also lasting influence for the votes which are coming up, which we're going to get to in a second. They add to your hand, and that's always handed out to them. There's never a negative to having lots of cards in your hand. You don't have to go through all your cards or anything like that, because the last action you can choose is a call to vote. When you call to vote, the first thing you do is you check how many cards are left in your hand that you haven't spent yet in your discard pile, and you're going to get 1 money or an influence or build a road for each one of those left over to you. Then you get to reclaim all the cards you've played and take back all your workers to free up these worker spaces. Unfortunately then, everyone else gets their income. Now I was talking about every time you get access to another resource on the board, your income in money is going to go up, and this is when you get to claim that money to refill your coffers. The human here is down to 1 money, they might need some more in order to do some of the buildings we've been talking about. You always must pay for these buildings to be built. Then we're going to have a vote. So what are we voting on? I've been talking about prestige buildings all the way through. There are always 3 prestige buildings up for the vote. And each player is going to take their vote tokens, and they indicate which of the 3 buildings they wish to vote for. Just by being in the vote with your token, that's worth 1 point of vote. These fleeting influence we've been talking about, if you don't spend them during a vote, they completely disappear, and they're worth 1 point as well. So it's always worth spending those. You then have lasting influence. Now you can choose to hold these back, because if you don't spend them, that they will last you and go onwards, and you can save them up for bigger votes you might want to win. But they are worth 2 points every time you come to a vote. So what are we voting on? Let's have a look at some of these prestige buildings and see what difference they can make, because there's lots of points to be scored here off them. Let's look at the brown door. Now, whenever one of these 3 is voted in, the other 2 get discarded, and they will probably cycle back around in the course of a game. And basically the blueprint of this building gets put into the city, saying that's where we're going to build it. But they all need to be supplied with certain different resources. Now in this case, it needs wood, and it needs jewelry, it needs brick, and it needs this material stuff as well. And whenever someone supplies it to it, it's going to score points in a very similar way to building these tier 3 and tier 2 resource buildings. It cascades downwards. So if we vote for this, let's say for example it got placed up here. Now they all have a certain terrain type that one of their squares must match. In this case, it is the entrance terrain type. We can pop this here. No one owns a prestige building. It doesn't matter who won the vote. You never own a prestige building. But this immediately is connected to wood, which would mean that the Valrath player immediately scores these 2 points and pops their cube there. No one else can supply wood to this one. When all the 4 resources are supplied, this building will be built. One of these 6 markers will come across, and when all 6 markers are in play, that will be the final turn of the game. Also, the card for that building gets flipped over, and it becomes available as a worker placement place. In this case, discard a card, accept your call to vote to perform its main action. So you can choose on someone else's turn to take a different main action, or on your own turn, you can discard a card, perform its main action, and no one else can follow if you choose to place there. Each of the buildings has got slightly different actions, and they've got slightly different placement rules, and where you put them down obviously will depend upon what they link up to. If there's ever a tie, for example, I place this so it could conceivably connect to, let's say, both gems, I would then choose which one connects and who gets access and who scores the points. We've got other ones like the Superior Sundry that needs to go onto a forest space, and this might be why we were building furs down here, because if that gets placed there again, we immediately supply it with furs. And look at that, it immediately is getting supplied as well with that livestock. And that is 2/3 of the way to being built. It just needs some brick. And you can see that these scoring opportunities are going to pop up all around the city. And it's where people can pounce on them, connect their goods to them, work in conjunction with other people, but not letting them score too many points. That is going to score the most points in Founders of Gloomhaven. This has been a Gamepit Pit Stop. For more videos like this, check out our YouTube channel. And for more in-depth coverage of gaming, please find the Gamepit Podcast.